That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Blitz, the fifth narrative feature directed by Steve McQueen, which premiered at the 2024 BFI London Film Festival. It is being released courtesy of Apple TV Plus on November 1st, 2024, before it will be available to stream on their service November 22nd, 2024.
I know Steve McQueen did 12 Years a Slave.
His Oscar-winning film. Yes, but he also did Hunger before that, which I'm pretty sure I made you watch at one point. Shame, and in his first 3 starred Michael Fassbender. You have seen Widows, which was his last theatrical feature before this. But if you haven't seen it, I recommend his Small Axe trilogy, which is considered for television. There are 5 titles in there, but all of those received notable film festival premieres. Also, just prior to this, Occupied City, which is a lengthy documentary about occupied Amsterdam during World War II, which suggests that he's been kind of on a World War II kick, considering this film as well.
What is Blitz about? In World War II London, 9-year-old George is evacuated to the countryside by his mother Rita to escape the bombings. Defiant and determined to return home to his family, George embarks on an epic, perilous journey. What is your pull quote?
A Dickensian odyssey of survival and identity politics during Britain's terrifying blitzkrieg, McQueen's slickly paced film is emotionally gratifying and meaningfully recuperative.
Mine. McQueen crafts a beautifully kinetic, heartbreaking fairy tale nightmare. I really enjoyed this movie.
Yeah.
It was not what I expected. It's energetic. There are a lot of levels. And it reminded me of several many films, like
Same.
The Wizard of Oz. The most obvious is what you mentioned, which was
Pinocchio. It's young George's journey to, becoming a real boy, kind of.
But I'm also getting like Homeward Bound vibes.
Oh, and Oliver Twist.
Yes.
A little bit of Waterloo Bridge.
But the story, so Blitzkrieg refers to, because in German it means like lightning.
Lightning War.
So this style of like a war tactic where you just like bum rush the enemy from all sides for a swift victory. But it's 1940 London, Germany is attacking England, and we see that the opening tells us that the British government was having people evacuate to less populated areas, specifically children. So like over 1 million people were evacuated and half of those were children. So this story is about one child in particular, George.
Played by Elliott Heffernan in his debut.
So he lives with his mother, Saoirse Ronan, playing Rita.
Which reminds me of, I don't know if that's a reference to Rita Tushingham, because she kind of reminded me of early Rita roles, but yeah.
And they live in the house with her father.
Played by Paul Weller.
So she has to make the tough decision to send George off. And, he's only, 9? So he doesn't understand. When she gets him to the train station, he's upset and he tells her he hates her, which of course is very upsetting to her. And it's kind of a heartbreaking scene because she's chasing the train, trying to get him to look at her. But he makes his journey. And about an hour in, this little boy decides to jump off the train. And for the next 90 minutes, we see his journey back home, which is filled with a lot of trauma. And during this 90 minutes, we also get flashbacks to periods like before the war, how Saoirse met George's father. So Saoirse Ronan's a white lady and George is clearly biracial, like his dad must be black. And so we meet her with George's father, Marcus, who's from Grenada. And he is the victim of a hate crime at one point while she's already pregnant. And we're told that resulted in him being deported. So we get all that, and then to spoil it, George does make it back home. But when he gets home, he sees that his family home has been bombed and his grandfather was killed. But the final shot is George embracing his mother. The end.
Yeah.
There's so much about this film I liked. It's beautifully shot.
The cinematographer is York Lasso, who's you've probably seen a lot of his work before because he's been around for a while, worked with François Ozon, Olivier Assayas, also Luca Guadagnino on a couple titles, but so it makes sense that it looks as good as it does.
It's wartime, so of course, there's this like dreary, it's almost apocalyptic at times. Like we see large swatches of the city having been demolished. I'm assuming a lot of what we see is CGI, of course, and it's seamless. The costume design, the hair, it all is just so beautiful. I really felt like I was transported to another place. I think Saoirse Ronan gives a really great performance.
Yeah, it's a very kind, empathetic performance.
Which is, I thought we reviewed the Outrun, which she stars in, and I thought her performance was also very strong in that.
It is. She's very good in both of these, but the difference being that her the character, also based on a real person, is kind of repellent. Like you get tired of spending so much time with such a frustrating person, and this is a much more, this performance goes down more easily, for sure.
Yeah. I think the pacing and the levels kept it very interesting, because initially I'm like, oh, this might feel like a dry drama and revisiting, topics that are hard to watch and sit through. But this actually, while it is nightmarish and hard to sit through at times, I was very engaged. Yeah. I'm just going to go through, I don't have a lot of notes. So we find out that Rita, Saoirse's character, sings. She works in a factory where many women do, helping make ammunitions.
During the war. A very swing shift.
Yes.
If you ever saw that.
And we see that the government is trying to boost morale by having some of these women show their talents. So BBC Live, on the radio, specifically for Saoirse, allowing her to sing. And we know that her father likes to play the piano. She and George, and all three of them, sing at home.
And Paul Weller's a notable musician. Yeah.
And she sings a very beautiful song that's dedicated to all the mothers who had to send their children off. But it ends with all of some of her co-workers bum rushing the microphone.
Well, because also part of the problem is during the air raids, when everybody has to find shelter in the subway stations, the police have been blocking the stations and not allowing people to go. So that's part of what that protest is about, is they need more shelter.
Yeah, they're chanting, "We need shelters, open the underground."
But Saoirse does have a nice voice. Previously,
is that her actual voice?
Yeah, she can.
Oh, she did sound very nice.
My favorite part of Ryan Gosling's directorial debut, Lost River, is her singing this Johnny Jewel song that I actually still have on several playlists. It's very haunting.
Oh, there are a number of shocking moments. The first one I recall is, so when little George hops off the train, we see him walk all night into the next day, and then he sees another train heading in the direction the opposite direction of where he's going, so he knows to get on that. And so he jumps into a car, and there are three other little boys in the car, one of whom you recognized.
Who's got a notable role in Matilda the musical.
And George makes friends with these three boys, and they end up jumping off the train because the train stops to make sure there are no stowaways, I guess. And there's a shocking moment when one of those boys gets hit by a train, and it took my breath away.
But that is also the only scene that does not work for me in this film.
Yeah, we can kind of go there. I think what doesn't make this a perfect film is, I think, that moment with the three boys. It did feel like perhaps the director was having a hard,
children are hard.
Children can be hard, and yes. I think that maybe having the four of them together, it did come across a little. Corny might be a word I would use.
It was corny. It felt stiff. It felt a little rigid. And not that I want to see children die, but I was happy that we got away from the concentration of children.
Oh God, I was shocked when that boy got hit by the train. It shook me like Hereditary when that little girl got her block knocked off.
Yeah, I'm laughing. It's not funny, but
no,
yes.
It's not. And then speaking of child actors, I think George did a good job, but it felt like he was being directed a lot.
Yes.
Make a scowl, look pouty, smile. It seemed like he was they had to really direct this kid to emote, and at times found it a little distracting.
Sure, but I think kids are like, especially having this kind of experience. I think you can get away with that because of the trauma being inflicted.
Sure. But probably because up until the initial scene with the four kids together, I was thinking, oh my gosh, is this like a 5-star film in the making for me? And then after the kids, then I'm thinking, oh, 4.5. But then the ending, the last 10 minutes, and we'll get to it, because I think the Wizard of Oz vibes for me are like, George has like these distinct moments where he meets different characters, good and bad. But in the end, it all culminates with him having spent the night in like an underground subway station, and he gets flooded due to bombings and like, I guess, a water main breaking. And a bunch of people, including George, get stuck. And so these adults grab him and basically force him to try to like fit through a small gate to get out and get help. And it's very stressful. Like, is he going to make it? And I didn't know, because we already saw one kid suddenly get killed. So I thought, is this how this film's going to end? But then all of a sudden we see he wakes up in some lady's house and she's being overly nice, telling him that, oh, you're George, everyone's talking about you. I'm going to take you home after I get you some breakfast. You live down the street. So it's like, oh my gosh, it's a happy ending. And then he gets dressed and sees that she called the cops and that they're going to take him to the station. So he runs away again and then runs back home.
Well, he knows where he is now.
Because he knows where he is and he recognizes landmarks. And then when he gets home, he sees that his home has been bombed. He sees his dead grandfather lying there.
In the rubble still, yeah. Ollie the cat is okay.
But the cat's fine. And then he turns around and sees his mom, and she runs to him. They embrace, and that's it. And I kind of felt like, we went on this kind of epic journey. Mm-hmm. That the last 10 minutes felt very like, meh. Because I cried several times, and I was expecting when he sees his mom that I was just going to be a pile of like goopy mess. And it was just very like, okay.
Yeah, sure.
I'm glad he got home.
It feels a bit anticlimactic, but there's also kind of some relief in that too. It's just like, he just got where he needed to be, and now we can move on.
So some of the bad things that happened to him, probably the worst is that he's hungry. Well, should we start with Effie first?
Sure. F.A.?
Okay, this is a positive. So he is running through the streets and gets picked up by a soldier named F.A., played by
Benjamin Clementine. Mm-hmm.
And he's this black man from Nigeria. And clearly George is not accustomed to being around black people. Because right when F.A. picks him up, we see George walking through this like, it almost looks like a museum or like a courtyard that has artwork. And he sees these statues of black people, like dark-skinned black people, and he seems captivated by them, like he's never seen that before. And then all of a sudden, this soldier touches him, and it's a man with very dark skin.
I think what's also important about those depictions of black people that we're seeing there too is that they're slave labor.
Yes.
And like they're working in coffee field, like they're gathering coffee beans and then sugar plantations. And then there's also notably all of these sugary confections that are set up in all of those installations, which is like signaling to this child, like, I enjoy these products that are built on the backs of these people. But
I also thought it was important because it seems like George has no connection to being black. And we know that because he sort of looks at F.A. like he's shocked that this is like a real human person of life. And then as they're walking, because F.A. says, well, let me get you back to the station. They talk, they become a little more friendly. And he says, well, how about this? I have rounds to finish. You can follow me. And then when we're done, I'll take you home. Mm-hmm. And then it's after, like once they become friendly and they're doing rounds, George asks F.A., are you black? And then George says, well, I'm not black. Mm-hmm. And then explains like my father was like deported. And then there's an incident where, there are two incidents where F.A. is disrespected by white people, but he goes high when they went low, and it's like a very sort of noble presentation. And then they go back to the shelter because Fa says, I don't have time to take you home and get some sleep.
Well, and there's an
altercation when there's a bombing, and there's an altercation between this white woman who doesn't want to be sat next to some Middle Eastern people. And then Fa has to sort of explain that like what Hitler's trying to do is segregate us. Like, we're not going to do that here. We're all working together. So there's kind of an emotional moment where George tells Fa, like, I'm black, after seeing what a great man Fa is. So that was a really lovely moment. It's almost like Fa is like an angel. And then he leaves to go do his rounds. And then George finds out shortly after that Fa was killed.
That same night. Yes.
That same night.
And he was going to come back and get him in the morning and bring him home. So now here he is adrift again.
So then he runs off. He's hungry. He ends up at he's like looking through the window of he has several moments where people just shoo him away. Like he's some sort of street rat. Even though it's wartime and like everyone's discombobulated, they see this little brown kid and they just shoo him away. But he's looking through a bakery window, and a woman in the bakery who also, she's biracial, so she looks like she could be his older sister. She, makes him feel comfortable, offers him some food. He agrees to go with her. And then we find out this lady is basically trafficking children.
She's a procurer.
And so she has basically trapped him to work for, like, she was part of this like gang where they're taking advantage of the war and they're breaking into buildings that have been bombed to steal. They're stealing jewelry off of dead people. And then we get a really tense scene where they have George like go into a jewelry store and he's almost caught by the military. I mean, it's a very scary moment. We see the leader of that little gang like abuse
Stephen Graham, yeah.
George. But at a point, there's another really beautifully shot scene where we see what looks like a lounge. It's like the Copacabana. And we see a really beautiful performance with people dancing and laughing. And then all of a sudden it gets bombed.
Revelry, yes.
And then we cut to this group of bandits with George. I mean, this was a very upsetting scene because they're walking around. You see all these people who are dead. And they're literally ripping off rings from the dead fingers.
They're cutting off fingers.
And George takes this as an opportunity to escape. And as he's leaving, he bumps into the lady who kidnapped him. And she turns a blind eye. So he's able to get away.
That scene, it also was reminding me of Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, a sequel to a much better film where these people are trying to pillage the riches left behind by the dead.
Then poor little George ends up in the subway underground. Like, this little kid doesn't know where he's going. He finds a blanket, falls asleep like in the train tracks with a bunch of other people. And then we see he has a dreaming of the dead, like Fa, the little boy who got killed by the train.
At his home train station, yeah.
And then there are women singing.
Like his mom.
I thought that was beautiful. And then, of course, like, we have to get shook back into reality. Now there's flooding. And I thought that was very well shot, very tense. And that's when they get trapped and he's able to escape. But it's not a gripe, because I can understand why this approach was taken, but I think it's a curious choice that we don't spend more time with George and his mother, or like we don't get more explanation of how this little boy is so disconnected from being black.
Yeah, but I also feel like the time and place makes sense. Like, I don't think his mother, as much as maybe she loved his father and the community his father belonged to, I don't know that these kind of white people at this time had the wherewithal to really explore that or had the agency to do so.
Sure, but we get moments where George is being ridiculed for being brown and having curly hair. He's called a dog, a monkey. He's upset about it, But
he internalizes it. He doesn't tell his mom?
No, he doesn't. But I found it, like, again, I don't think this is a deficit per se. It's just a curious choice that it's not sort of elaborated on how he...
They do it in a way like the grandpa is lecturing him about how to handle bullying because...
The grandpa knows.
The kid's different. And I think how Rita tries to make up for that is we see her a couple times telling him how beautiful and gorgeous he is. And that's the way she's trying to signal to him his worth.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, there aren't these conversations. But again, I don't think these people then would have had those conversations.
Sure. Yeah, that's why I'm not saying it's a deficit. It's just an interesting choice. Overall, though, I mean, this was so well crafted.
And I mean, a lot of notable people in the supporting cast, including Kathy Burke, who you might recognize as recently was a judge on RuPaul's Drag Race, but is kind of I'd say an acting legend.
I know her from Ab Fab.
But she's really good in Gary Oldman's directorial debut, Nil by Mouth. But she's been around for a long time.
She's very good in this. She plays sort of like the mother hen to this group of bandits.
Which is very Shelley Winters and Pete's Dragon.
Yeah, she's creepy.
She's creepy. Her character name is Beryl, which, like, I don't know, like Beryl Reed.
Or she's shaped like a barrel.
You remember Beryl Reed from The Killing of Sister George?
No, but
that kind of woman.
Oh.
And then Haley Squires is one of Rita's co-workers, and she's been in quite a few things, notably Daniel Blake. We saw her also in The Earth.
She has two homegirls, and I really enjoyed the flashbacks to them hanging out. We didn't even mention, or I didn't, Harris Dickinson's in the movie.
Harris Dickinson,
because he has nothing to do.
Jack, he's helpful, and he's making eyes at her, and he defends her to his other racist cohorts. But again, that's where I thought it was going to get like wartime romance, like Waterloo Bridge, this doomed romance.
That's what I was expecting.
But that doesn't really happen,
No.
and maybe it didn't got cut for conciseness.
It feels like there might have been more, and then we just didn't get it.
I think McQueen has a lot of sly touches in here, like with the coworkers, because Haley Squires is very outspoken, and so is this other white woman. But Doris, their other friend, is a woman of color, and when they have kind of that mini uprising during the radio show performance, Doris is the one that sits down and is like,
She said, "My name is Bennett, and I'm not in it."
but I can't risk losing my job
Right.
like you can. And I also think, what the hate crime that happens to Marcus is also partly Rita's fault. That it's exacerbated because of her, because this white man roughs up Marcus, and she is outspoken.
She tries to stick up for him when he's saying, "Let it go. This is going to escalate," and she doesn't, and then it does. Yeah, I thought that was well handled because also you see a bunch of, because they're at a club that is like integrated, so you see a lot of black people, and that scene was really cool because they were getting down in that club. I enjoyed that scene, but then everyone comes outside to see the commotion and no one steps in, which makes sense because they're like, well, then we're going to get dragged in too. So yeah, she is partially at fault, which is,
well, it's that examination of like white people needing to be aware of, you want to stand up and be vocal, but is that also beneficial to the person that you're doing this for right now too?
Right. Well, but that's why I think it's a curious choice to not have her character, like, we don't get any context of what George thinks about his dad. I was expecting a scene where maybe like she shows him a picture of his dad and he's questioning, like, why is he so dark? Why does he look like that? Or, or maybe a question of like, or a scene with Saoirse and her dad talking about George and how to explain to him certain things. And as it is, though, I still think this movie's excellent. What would you give Blitz? I
think it's worth a 4. I do.
I agree. I would give it 4 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.